Similarly to the video that I did last year, in this one, we're going to be going over some players that have struggled greatly. However, this select number of players haven't just struggled, they've also been more of a liability than anything for their respective teams, meaning that instead of contributing and pulling their own weight, instead, they've become dead weight entirely. In this video, we're going to go over a slew of players, their particular situations, and why they've become dead weight. But before we get started, I'd like to quickly thank Caden D for joining my Patreon. If you'd like to know days in advance what video I'm going to publish, or see unseen analytics, head on over to my Patreon to support my work. Link will be below for those who are interested. And with that, here are 4 NHL players that have become dead weight. When Zack Kassian was initially signed by Edmonton in 2016, the idea was that the forward would be able to protect young star Connor McDavid, but also provide the Oil with secondary scoring. And for a few seasons anyways, the arrangement did produce just what former GM Peter Chiarelli had in mind at the time. A player who could gel with McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and also drop the gloves that was decently cheap to keep on the books at an average of $1.9 million a season. Unfortunately though, after notching a career high of 34 points following 59 games played in 2019 and 2020, Kassian basically fell off a cliff as far as offense was concerned. Aside from facing injury woes that kept him sidelined for a portion of the 2020-21 campaign, Kassian wasn't able to compete with new additions such as Zach Hyman and Evander Kane. Kane especially brought similar elements to the lineup that Kassian already did, but produced significantly more when paired with Draisaitl or McDavid. Therefore, it was pretty much a no-brainer that GM Ken Holland would be shopping Kassian by the time last offseason came around. Luckily for Holland, the Arizona Coyotes took interest and helped get the $3.2 million Kassian would have demanded for 2 more seasons off of the books. Basically, the incentive was a higher first-round selection for Arizona in last year's entry draft and some additional picks. And really, considering the state of the Coyotes franchise, respectfully, Kassian probably wasn't feeling as much pressure to perform as he was in Oil Country. Looking at his first season with the Yotes, however, mediocre doesn't even scratch the surface. After playing in 51 games, he was only able to muster up 2 goals throughout. Kassian ended up tying with Justin Braun for the least amount of points notched in 51 games or more league-wide. While yes, Kassian did drop the gloves on a couple of occasions, even then he wasn't very effective. Need I remind you about the embarrassing tilt he had with rookie Arbor Xhekaj. Kassian will be entering the final season of his 4-year, $12.8 million contract next campaign, and will be a UFA in the offseason of 2024. If you watched last year's video, well, you may recall that I put a different shark on the list. Yes, I ended up putting current Norris nominee Erik Karlsson down right before he set forth on a redemption arc and proved us all wrong. With that being said, perhaps I had the wrong guy all along. In fact, looking at it now, the most deadweight that San Jose has is still coming from the back end. But it's not Erik Karlsson these days at all. It's Marc-Edouard Vlasic. In fact, shortly prior to Vlasic securing the contract he has in effect today, he was considered underrated by the majority of NHL fans. And it made sense really. Even though he was in Brent Burns' shadow, Vlasic managed to notch 32 points throughout the 2017-18 campaign. He also had a 2.4 goals above expected, which was the highest amongst all Sharks defensemen for the season. His shooting percentage was also the highest, surpassing his fellow Blue Liners at 6.83. In result, former GM Doug Wilson decided to reward Vlasic with a lengthy 8-year extension valued at $56 million. Unfortunately, the biggest mistake Wilson made was giving Vlasic a full no move clause on the deal for over half of the contract, as it seemed that almost directly after getting a pay raise, the defenseman's overall production began to decline. While bringing in an AAV of $7 million a season, Vlasic for the past 4 campaigns has failed to surpass the 20-point mark entirely. His shooting percentage was also the lowest amongst all San Jose defensemen last campaign, who played in 23 or more games. Therefore, knowing that Vlasic once did have a scoring touch and the ability to hit the net, it has to be rather troubling for San Jose fans, especially considering that Vlasic's modified no-trade clause that's set to take effect next season only allows for a 3-team trade list to be submitted. And despite having to keep him on the books, Sharks coaching staff has reduced his playing time significantly, as Vlasic now plays 5 minutes less per game than he did in 2019 and 2020, and in every season prior to. Thankfully for Sharks fans, his contract does have an expiration date and is set to expire in 2026. Last video, we talked about the Jeff Carter problem that former GM Ron Hextall has seemingly created in the Steel City, and for good reason, as Carter is also, just like most on this list, an aging veteran who doesn't have a lot to offer his team. Just to prove the unfortunate point, Carter, upon Pittsburgh's 6-4 loss to Montreal, was just the second player last season and the 15th since 1998 to be on the ice for less than 9 minutes and still be a -4, meaning that throughout just the 8 minutes and 28 seconds that Carter was on the ice, the Habs scored 4 times. Now, obviously we're not here to bash the forward, as he was absolutely terrific in the faceoff circle last season for the Pens. In fact, Carter won more faceoffs than anyone on Pittsburgh's roster, with an impressive 59.4 faceoff win percentage. But in the grand scheme of things, Carter is still a liability. The scary part about it, however, is that Carter still has a full no-move clause in effect on his contract that doesn't expire until next year. While yes, he did manage to notch 29 points in 79 games played, Carter was anything but consistent. In fact, at one point, he went 11 games in a row without notching a single point. Carter has one remaining season left on his deal in which he'll bring in $3.125 million before becoming a UFA. When former GM Chuck Fletcher made the choice to sign Rasmus Ristolainen to a 5-year, $25 million contract, many were skeptical as to why. At 6'4" and 220 pounds, yes, the defenseman has the right frame for physicality. However, outside of that, he's failed to bring much else to the playing surface. This past January, for example, was the first time Ristolainen tickled the twine in nearly an entire year, as he was able to get one past the struggling Anaheim Ducks on January 17th. He ended his scoring drought that began on January 22nd of 2022 against his former team, the Buffalo Sabres. And even more shockingly, it took 27 games last campaign before Ristolainen even had a single point. Therefore, even though scoring isn't always a defenseman's #1 priority, the fact that he's getting paid $5.5 million a season means that more is expected of him. Speaking of last season, Ristolainen had the worst goals above expected with a -2 amongst all Flyers D-men. He also had the worst shooting percentage out of the entire team with a 3.5 when considering players who played 52 or more games. Outside of blocking shots and hitting against opponents, unfortunately, Ristolainen doesn't have a lot to offer. Last season, he was able to muster up 20 points in 74 games played. One good thing about his situation, however, is the fact that the defenseman doesn't have a clause on his contract that's set to expire in 2022.